It happened on a Monday morning, the kind of day where everything felt wrong the second the sun came up. People were irritable, traffic lights out of sync, coffee machines jammed at the worst moments. But no one could have expected what went down inside the pristine glass walls of Braverton Enterprises, one of the top-performing tech firms in the country. The place was known for its innovation, its spotless lobby, its motivational posters framed in gold, and above all, its brutal hierarchy. What happened that day should have never occurred in a company that prides itself on people-first culture, but it did. And once the security footage leaked, everything unraveled. The janitor, whose name barely anyone knew, clocked in early that morning. His ID badge just read T. Morgan. A man in his late 50s, hunched slightly, wearing an old blue janitor's jumpsuit, his graying hair covered by a faded cap, and worn brown boots that had seen too many years of bleach and grime. He moved through the office like a shadow, often invisible even when he was standing right in front of people. Nobody said hello. Nobody looked him in the eye. That day, as he scrubbed the edges of the executive break room sink, a group of junior associates walked in, loud and overconfident, mocking his presence like he was part of the furniture. One of them, Trevor, nudged his coworker and muttered just loud enough, "Why is this guy always lurking around?" "It's gross." They laughed. The janitor didn't flinch. He just kept scrubbing. Another whispered, "He probably lives in that closet downstairs. Bet he hasn't seen a clean shower in months." Again, the janitor didn't respond, but someone else was watching. Later that morning, while mopping near the glass elevators, he accidentally bumped into Sarah, one of the firm's assistant managers known more for her stilettos than her strategy. Her hot latte splashed onto her blouse, and her reaction was immediate. She shoved him back with her elbow and hissed, "God, can't you look where you're going? This shirt costs more than your monthly wage." He mumbled an apology, but she'd already pulled out her phone and snapped a photo of him. "Let's see if HR wants to talk about safety hazards," she said, not realizing that she'd set off a chain of events no one could undo. The security team was notified. The janitor was called into a room near the back, the one without windows. No one explained why. A young HR rep named Megan read from a printed page. "There have been complaints," she said, avoiding his eyes. "We've received concerns about your presence making some employees uncomfortable." His face stayed blank. They asked him to sign a document. "Voluntary resignation," it said. He refused. Then they said they'd have to put him on probation. He shrugged. One of them asked, "Do you even care if you lose this job?" For the first time, he looked up. "I care more than you know." But no one was listening. By lunchtime, rumors had spread that the janitor had threatened a manager. Some said he yelled. Some said he pushed someone. One even claimed he stole something from the CEO's office, though no one could explain why he would even be near there. The strangest part? The CEO wasn't even in the building, or so they thought. Security footage later showed a strange inconsistency. In one clip, the janitor could be seen emptying trash bins near the 5th floor. Moments later, another camera showed him on the 10th floor at the exact same time. 2 places, 2 floors, 1 timestamp. The files were flagged. An internal investigation was requested. That's when IT discovered something else. The janitor had logged into a restricted server at 7:14 a.m. Except janitors didn't have access to any system, let alone that one. And no password was entered, just a swipe of his ID badge, the badge that was supposedly linked to basic access only. Around 2:30 p.m., just as things were spiraling, the main entrance opened. A sleek black SUV pulled up. Out stepped a tall, broad-shouldered man in a tailored navy blue suit, expensive watch glinting in the sunlight. No one recognized him at first. A few interns near the front desk assumed he was some high-powered consultant. That changed fast when he walked directly to the executive floor, ignoring the front desk, ignoring security, swiping a card that none of them had ever seen before, and all the lights above the elevators turned blue. That only happened when one person arrived, the CEO. He hadn't been seen in nearly 6 months. Rumors said he was abroad, buying up startups, expanding the empire. But here he was, walking with purpose, eyes cold, lips sealed. The executive team scrambled like ants. Calls were dropped. Meetings were canceled. Sarah, still in her stained blouse, tried to act composed as he passed her desk. He didn't stop, didn't nod, didn't acknowledge her presence. Instead, he walked into the boardroom and shut the door behind him. 5 minutes later, he summoned one person, T. Morgan. The janitor was still downstairs, changing out a dirty mop head when security approached. "You're needed upstairs," one of them said, more polite than usual. He looked surprised, but didn't argue. On the elevator ride up, no one spoke. When the doors opened, every eye in the corridor turned toward him. Whispers, confusion, fear. He stepped into the boardroom. The door clicked shut. What happened in that room remained a mystery until 2 days later, when a memo was leaked online. It wasn't supposed to exist, but the contents shook the company to its core. "Effective immediately," it read. "The board of directors recognizes Terrence Morgan as acting president and CEO of Braverton Enterprises." Attached was a signature. The same man who had mopped their floors, cleaned their coffee stains, and been laughed at for months, was actually the owner of the entire company. The document traced back to a clause in the company's founding charter. Morgan was one of the original co-founders, but after a corporate betrayal years ago, he'd stepped down and gone underground to observe. Disguised as a janitor, he'd returned after new board members took over, wanting to see how the culture had changed. The answer: it hadn't. It had gotten worse. That was when the floodgates burst. Employees scrambled to delete emails. Managers held secret meetings. HR tried to rewrite files, but it was too late. Morgan had seen everything: the mocking, the surveillance, the forced resignation attempt, the photos. He had it all, and he wasn't done. Sarah was suspended indefinitely. Trevor was fired. Megan in HR put on review and asked to surrender her access. And still, no one had seen Morgan since that boardroom meeting. Not in the halls, not in the elevators, not on the cameras. It was like he vanished again, but now with full control of the company. The final blow came on Friday morning, when every employee received a company-wide video message. It opened with a clip of the break room incident. Sarah's words loud and clear. Then it cut to footage from the elevators, the insults, the cold shoulders, the laughter. Finally, Morgan's voice. "You never know who's watching. You never know who built the floor you stand on." The video ended with one sentence on a black screen. "Phase 2 begins Monday." No one knew what that meant, but fear swept the building. Offices were empty. Slack channels went dead. Some even came in over the weekend just to clean out their desks before it was too late. Rumors began swirling that Morgan was preparing a mass restructuring. Others said he was going to release a public list of every complaint, every insult, every name. But none of that compared to the real twist. Over the weekend, a private investigator arrived at the office requesting files connected to one of the board members. Not just any files: internal communications, financial logs, employee complaints. Turns out someone at the top had been embezzling millions, and Morgan had known for months. He'd just been waiting for one final move. On Monday morning, the police walked into the Braverton lobby with warrants in hand. And that's where part 2 begins. Because just when everyone thought they'd seen the full extent of the truth, they found the hidden elevator. And what was underneath the building changed everything. The Monday after the message, the atmosphere at Braverton Enterprises was radioactive. The sleek glass building that once buzzed with empty arrogance and self-assurance now sat in eerie silence, as if the walls themselves knew something dark had shifted. Desks were vacant, inboxes untouched. The usually congested executive floor looked abandoned. No catered lunch deliveries, no frantic junior analysts printing reports they didn't understand. Just the slow, dreadful ticking of the lobby's oversized wall clock. The only sound was the steady click of polished shoes walking across marble. Terrence Morgan was back. But this time, he wasn't pushing a janitor's cart or wiping someone else's mess. He was dressed in a sharp charcoal gray suit, crisp white shirt open at the collar, no tie. No need. His presence did more than demand attention. It owned the space. He walked past the front desk without a word, past the security turnstiles that no longer beeped at him, past employees who now greeted him with a mixture of reverence and terror. Morgan didn't stop, didn't smile. He made his way toward the east wing, the part of the building no one ever talked about, because no one was allowed in, except him. 12 floors below Braverton's main lobby was an unmarked elevator, concealed behind a panel that looked like part of the wall. It had no call button, no directory. But as Morgan approached, the panel beeped and slid open, revealing a steel-plated elevator with only one glowing button, Sub-Level 13. No one, not even the company's longest-standing board members, knew what was down there. When the doors shut behind him and the elevator began to descend, everything changed. The sleek hum of the building's air conditioning faded. The walls thickened. Lights dimmed. Then, with a soft chime, the doors opened. It wasn't what anyone would expect. No high-tech lab, no secret weapons, no stacks of gold bars or confidential contracts. It was an archive, a sprawling, cold, fluorescent-lit floor filled with rows of filing cabinets, metal lockers, computers, servers humming with quiet menace. Surveillance screens lined the far wall. At the center was a long table with a single leather chair, his chair. And on that table was a slim black folder labeled Operation Retribution. Morgan took a deep breath and opened it. Inside was everything. Confidential memos, illegal payouts, whistleblower reports buried by HR, offshore accounts linked to board members, NDAs covering workplace abuse, tax fraud. But most damning of all were files tied to the man the police had come to arrest that morning, Clayton Voss. Clayton had always been untouchable. As chief strategy officer and unofficial puppet master of the board, he had manipulated every major decision for the last 5 years. A charmer in public, a tyrant behind closed doors. Morgan had suspected him for a long time, even before his disguise as the janitor. But there hadn't been enough evidence until Sarah's outburst and the HR meeting gave him access to their new data system. Sarah thought she was humiliating a janitor. In reality, she handed the CEO the key to a vault of secrets. Morgan stood up, folder in hand, and headed back up to the surface. When the elevator doors reopened into the main lobby, everything was in motion. Officers in dark jackets were speaking to security. News crews had started forming outside the revolving doors. Employees peeked from cubicles like nervous children. And standing at the center of it all was Clayton. Tall, silver-haired, with a politician's smile and a shark's eyes, Clayton was talking calmly to 2 officers as if he were clearing up a parking ticket. That smile vanished when Morgan stepped out of the elevator. Clayton stiffened. "Terrence," he said, voice cool, "we need to talk in private." Morgan walked past him, handed the black folder directly to the lead detective and said, "No, we're doing this in front of everyone." The detective flipped the folder open, scanned the top page, and immediately motioned to his partner. Within seconds, Clayton was in handcuffs. Gasps echoed. Someone dropped their coffee. A few even applauded quietly. But Clayton's eyes never left Morgan. "This isn't over," he said. Morgan leaned in slightly. "It is for you." The arrest sent shockwaves across the building and far beyond. By noon, the Braverton scandal was trending across every platform. News anchors replayed the footage of Clayton's arrest side by side with the viral video of Morgan being mocked by Sarah and the others. Stockholders panicked. Some tried to distance themselves. Others begged for interviews. But the one thing everyone wanted to know was, why would a man worth hundreds of millions disguise himself as a janitor? And Morgan gave them an answer. That evening, he released a video statement from his private office. I built this company from the ground up with two partners. One stole money, the other stole credit. So I stepped away, not because I lost, but because I needed to see what my company had become without me. What I saw horrified me. Elitism, cruelty, silence in the face of injustice. I didn't want revenge. I wanted clarity. And now, I have it. Effective immediately, Braverton Enterprises will restructure under new principles: integrity, transparency, and empathy. Leadership will change, culture will change, and if you're not ready for that, you're free to leave. By Tuesday morning, dozens of resignations had hit HR. Sarah's was the first. Trevor's came shortly after. Megan didn't even show up. Her desk was already cleared. But many stayed. Some because they were scared, others because they believed him. Morgan's next move shocked them all. He walked back into the same janitor's closet where he'd stored his old cart and blue jumpsuit. He stood in the doorway for a moment, as if revisiting an old battlefield. Then he wheeled the cart out, down the corridor, and into the executive wing. When he reached the center of the floor, he stopped. All the senior staff were watching him from their glass offices. Then, in complete silence, Morgan unzipped the cart's front pouch and pulled out a stack of sealed white envelopes. He began sliding them under each office door. Inside each one was a letter, not a termination notice, not a demotion, an assignment. Every manager, every executive was given a one-week rotation in basic operations. Some were told to help IT with server installations, others to assist kitchen staff in the break room. A few were placed on the janitorial team. If you cannot do their job, Morgan wrote, you are not qualified to lead them. There was outrage, complaints, some refused, but Morgan was unbothered. One afternoon, he visited the break room to find a former VP of marketing in a hairnet serving sandwiches. The VP looked embarrassed, but Morgan smiled and said, "You're doing good work." The man flushed and nodded. It was humiliating, but it was also transformative. Within weeks, things shifted. Departments began speaking to each other like people. Meetings became shorter, more human. Employees started sharing names with the janitors. Someone printed "Be Decent" posters and taped them above the coffee machine. The culture was changing, not through fear, but through exposure, through accountability. Then came the final meeting. Morgan gathered the entire company, both in person and via live stream, for one last announcement. He stood on the stage with a simple mic, no flashy slides behind him. I never wanted to be famous. I never wanted to be a symbol. But I do want to be clear. What happened here was never about one person being mistreated. It was about a system that let it happen, over and over, because no one wanted to ask questions. That ends now. Today, I'm donating half my shares to create an independent ethics board that answers directly to the employees. No chain of command, no red tape, just people holding people accountable, and starting next year, 10% of all executive bonuses will be redirected to frontline staff, permanently. He paused, then scanned the room. If anyone has a problem with that, there's the door. No one moved. No one even blinked. He stepped back from the mic. And then it happened. One by one, employees rose to their feet. Not because they were told to, but because they wanted to. Thunderous applause erupted. For the janitor, for the CEO, for the man who showed the entire world that being at the bottom doesn't mean you're beneath anyone. In the weeks that followed, Braverton became a case study. Universities taught it, media praised it, other companies tried to copy it. But no one could replicate the moment. Because the truth is, what changed Braverton wasn't policy. It was the courage of one man who decided that the best disguise wasn't hiding power, but humility. And somewhere, In a quiet office with no nameplate on the door, Terrence Morgan leaned back in his chair, stared out the window at the city skyline, and smiled. Because sometimes to clean up the mess, you have to be willing to get your hands dirty first.